Hi, I'm Peter Ray. Welcome to the program. Today we will have an anecdote based on Star Wars, history, and physics. It's a fictional story, but which requires a long prologue. So first, starting with Star Wars. In Star Wars Episode 1, young Anakin Skywalker is being reviewed by the Jedi Council to see how he's doing with his training, see how he's getting along with his training with Qui-Gon Jinn. And so he's this young boy, and one of the Jedi Council members says, "You fear for your mother." And then Anakin says, "What's that got to do with anything?" And then Yoda says, "Everything. Fear leads to hate. Hate leads to anger. Anger leads to suffering." So now keep that in mind. Thank you to Victor Bassa, former Restless student who used to imitate that in class and stayed in my memory. Okay, now moving on to history. In the Christian Bible, in the Old Testament, that is the story of the Jewish people and the Jewish religion, which started with Abraham, who moved from Iraq to what's now Israel. And Israel is this small country, also known as Palestine, on the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea. It's near Africa and Egypt, also near Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, and southeastern Europe, Greece. So anyway, Abraham established Judaism, the Jewish people, and then generations later, the Jewish people ended up in Egypt because of a famine in the Middle East. And the people were saved by Joseph, who was his descendant, who was a prophetic dreamer. Okay? Centuries later, the Jewish people had become enslaved in Egypt, and Moses led them back to Israel, and they established themselves there, in Israel, ancient Israel, and established a kingdom. And one of the great kings of Israel was David. David built the temple, which was their place of worship, and that included the Ark of the Covenant, which is mentioned in the Indiana Jones movie, one of them. Anyway, Jerusalem was the capital of ancient Israel and considered a holy city for Jewish people. Centuries later, one of the Jewish people was a very holy man named Jesus, who established Christianity and taught people to love and forgive and to be peaceful, to love God and love each other. And that powerful message is still with us and has helped us so much over the centuries, 2,000 years ago, Christianity. Now Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem. And he came back from the dead on Easter Sunday in Jerusalem as well. So for Christians, Jerusalem also is a holy city. And but with the fall of the Roman Empire, things changed. 600 years after the life of Jesus, another holy man came alive and lived in Arabia, named Muhammad. And Muhammad established the religion of Islam. Now Muslims believe that at the end of Muhammad's life, he flew with Angel Gabriel from Mecca in what's now Saudi Arabia to Jerusalem and ascended to heaven from Jerusalem. And on that spot, the Muslims built a mosque called the Dome of the Rock. So for Muslims also, Jerusalem is a holy city. Up till now, Jewish people and Muslims are fighting over Jerusalem. Now, with the fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of the Muslim Empire after Muhammad's death, during his life and after his death, this great Muslim empire wound up taking over Arabia and North Africa and much of the Middle East, including Jerusalem. So Jerusalem became a Muslim-controlled city. During the Middle Ages, Christian armies came to Israel, to Jerusalem, because they thought, wow, Jerusalem should be under Christian control. This isn't right. They believed that it should be Christian governed. But they succeeded only briefly, and for the most part, Jerusalem remained under Muslim control.
12 is like the longest one.
Wait a minute. Let me turn off the clock.
No, it's fine.
I'll leave it go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Start like 2 sentences, like before. Do you remember what you said before?
No, but I'll do my best.
Right.
So, anyway, Muhammad, at the end of his life, according to Muslim belief, flew with Angel Gabriel from Mecca and what's now Saudi Arabia to Jerusalem and ascended to heaven. And so for Muslims, Jerusalem is a holy city as well. And a mosque was built there in Jerusalem called the Dome of the Rock. So for Jewish people, Christians, and Muslims, Jerusalem is a holy city. Okay? During the Crusades, Christians tried and only briefly were able to take Jerusalem, but it remained under Muslim rule throughout as the centuries passed. Now, the last great Muslim empire was the Ottoman Empire. It was a Turkish empire. And it ruled North Africa, most of the Middle East, much of the Balkan Peninsula into Central Asia. But the Ottoman Empire went into decline in the late 1800s and into the early 20th century. In the First World War, the Ottoman Empire sided with the side that lost the First World War. And they ended up at war with Great Britain, which was the world's superpower. In 1917, the British took Jerusalem from the Turks. And this was, for people historically minded Christians who'd studied the Crusades, this was a fulfillment of the Crusader wish that Jerusalem be under Christian rule. However, for Muslims, and especially for Turks, this was a terrible thing, because, as I said, Jerusalem was a holy city for Muslims, and Turks felt especially bad because they were the caretaker of Jerusalem, and it had been lost. Now, a few decades later, the modern state of Israel was developed. But, going back to 1917, the British general was named General Edmund Allenby. And he was the British general who took Jerusalem from the Turks in 1917. So naturally, for Turkish people, he was not a popular person. This was a hard thing for them to accept. Okay. Now, briefly into science and physics. An inclined plane is a flat surface which is tilted. We use them all the time. It's a simple machine in physics. When you're driving your car, when the road goes up and down, you're using an inclined plane to raise or lower your elevation. A good example would be a wheelchair ramp, where you can easily push someone in a wheelchair to a higher level in a building, up and avoid the stairs. So an inclined plane is a physics concept. And okay, so my wife Alice and our son Tim and I lived in the Philippines for many years, and since 2003 we lived on a street called Allenby Street. Interesting. Allenby Street is an inclined plane. In other words, it's kind of steep, actually. Now, a Turkish school was established in San Juan, not too far from where we lived, called Fountain International School. And my son and I used to go to a park. For many years we used to go to a park called Roosevelt Park in Green Hills West, a subdivision. And then I noticed at one point these Turkish teachers started coming. And I played basketball with them, made friends with them, and played some soccer. One of the teachers was a physics teacher, a real big guy named Gokai. And he could dunk a basketball. and real nice fellow. So anyway, now we're, okay, one final thing. I had a friend who was in San Juan City Jail, an inmate, and I used to visit him. It wasn't too far away. I used to walk every Saturday and visit this friend of mine. And this, the jail was just near or next to this Fountain International School, the Turkish school. Okay, and I used to pass by on my way to visit my friend. And also in that same area, right in the same area, is a famous scene from Philippine history, the battle site of San Juan del Monte, also known as Pinaglabanan, the first battle in the Philippine War of Independence fought in 1896, where Andres Bonifacio was the general and the leader of Philippine forces. Okay, so that's pretty interesting. Now we're getting into the fictional part of the story. Everything has been true so far. So now the story, I'll tell the story, which I think is amusing. Anyway, so one day I was on my way to visit my friend in San Juan City Jail. All of a sudden I was surrounded by angry Turks. And I thought, oh my God, what's going on here? And the one Turkish fellow said, "So, Mr. Peter Ray." And I said, "Yeah, I'm Peter Ray. Mr. Peter Ray of Allenby Street." And I said, "Yeah, we live on Allenby Street." And he said, "Allenby Street, named after General Edmund Allenby, the enemy of all Turks." And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble. And this guy is, you know, history can lead to trouble. And I thought, this guy's mad at me. I live on a street named after the enemy of Turkish people, General Edmund Allenby. So I thought to myself, how can I get out of this, right? And then light bulb went off in my head. And I said, "It's an inclined plane! It's an inclined plane! It's an inclined plane! Allenby Street is an inclined plane!" And then I saw Gokai. He's a physics teacher. I said, "Gokai, Allenby Street is an inclined plane." And then everyone looked at Gokai, and Gokai said, "Yes, it is true. Allenby Street is an inclined plane." And then the leader of the Turks said, What's that got to do with anything?" And then I said, "Everything. Inclined planes leads to physics. Physics leads to science. Science leads to friendship." And so the Turks looked at each other, started muttering, and they dispersed. And I was saved. I was saved by science. I was almost doomed by history. So the moral of the story is, well, actually there is no moral, but the point of the story is, if you study enough history and then combine it with popular culture and a little bit of science, you can come up with a crazy story that will leave people scratching their heads. So anyway, thank you for being so patient and watching this video. Live long and prosper. May the Force be with you. God bless you. God bless the Philippines, America, and the whole world. See you next time.